Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Transportation, Infrastructure, Energy, and Environment Committee. We have our second work session on the bicycle master plan. Dr. Orland.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'll point out that from the last work session, you had asked the planning board and staff to come up with language which dealt with three issues. One was to remove the specific implementation years from the different tiers. Secondly, that text be added that does not guarantee that all the bikeways would be built, and even those built may not be built as specified. And thirdly, that no bikeway would be built that would cause any part of the subdivision staging policy to fail at the point in time that that bikeway is being built. So at SSP, of course, the rules change periodically, and whatever the given rules are at the time. Chairman Anderson's transmitted a memorandum, circles 1 through 5. I think he's addressed all those issues well, and with specific changes to the plan to address those points, and I recommend approval of them. We can go.
Without objection?
Okay, good. Then you recall at the last work session I attached a memo from the DOT, from the planning board staff with several changes to the priorities of 13 bikeways. They're on circles 6 through 8. They're included here again. And I think all those changes are good ones, and I recommend approval of those.
Without objection?
Okay. Also, the planning staff transmitted further changes to the text regarding interstate ramps, freeway crossings, and also certain updates to the recommendations they made in the May plan and errors to be corrected. I recommend approval of all of those. One of those is an update to the Tuckerman Lane bikeway recommendation. That's actually going to go before this committee a week from Thursday. Facility planning is Phase 1 has been completed on that, and this is your time to review it. And basically, the staffs are pretty much in agreement as to what the path forward is. Pardon the expression.
Ooh, ooh.
Really, that was not premeditated. There are a couple of additions that the planning staff would like to see, and the board would like to see to that version. But in terms of the basic bikeway, they're recommending basically side paths rather than separate bike lanes, separated bike lanes. And so that's also included in the memo that they sent. So I'm recommending approval of all of that.
We will eliminate errors.
That's part of that, right. The next section has to do with, again, prioritization. First of all, the first part is just a really correction in terms of priority, or actually the programmed projects that show up in the plan. One of them is no longer programmed, which is the Goshen Road South Bikeway. You recall the money for that project was taken out of the 6-year period. There's only money left over in FY20 for DOT to rescope the project, so there's no particular time frame that any kind of a hiker biker path would be built along Goshen Road, at least not at this time. So I'm recommending that be taken out of that table, but also include a small.
Wait. So you're working out,
Where are
is
you?
that to have it consistent with, because the Goshen Road,
The Goshen Road project is gone within the 6 years. It's not funded at all, which includes the bike path and the sidewalk.
What page are you on, Dr. Orland?
just sent to,
In the packet, it's top page 2, but in the memo, in the plan, what page you say, Pam? Oh, I'll find it quickly here. Bear with me. It's a large plan. It takes time
do
to.
you really need a bike path on Gold Mine Road?
Well, you've approved it the last several years.
I know,
on the
but there's,
project.
is it, I mean, I'll ask the bicyclists here, the cyclists,
Well, I'll tell you.
it's a really, not a heavily traveled road by any means.
You know,
The road needs to be, I was just there, the road needs to be repaved perhaps, but
well,
is that really a bike, do you really need it?
I think you're raising a good point. I was looking actually at the Falls Road project. Which
Well, Falls Road, we've been arguing about that for forever, we need to do
Well,
that.
right, and I several years ago had a conversation with Jennifer Hughes about this, and she was telling me that every CIP cycle should look at this project and recommend to Ike that it not be
Falls?
moved forward because it was hard to justify in terms of, usage, which is not to say it's a bad project, but I'm just, as I look at this list and I hear what you're saying about Gold Mine Road, my suggestion would be if you might want to ask DOT to just evaluate this list, just to see, notwithstanding the fact some of them have moved pretty far along in the planning process, if there are some that are going to go forward, like Bradley Boulevard, I think absolutely is going to go forward and should go forward. But maybe there's one or two others here.
Falls Road, we've got to get done, if that's what you're suggesting that we do.
I'm agnostic on it. I'm just saying that.
I'm not,
I'm just trying to be responsive to your comment.
but
and
I do wonder about
acknowledge-
Gold Mine.
Gold Mine Road, what's happening there, the project is to replace the bridge.
I know.
And so the approaches have to be revised as well. There's already a bikeway that goes over from George Avenue to a point, I can't remember how many feet from the bridge, and this basically carries it over one more block. It's a very short section of bike path.
Oh, is that all?
But it is,
I just, I mean, it's country anyways. Okay, if it's
But if
not
you're
that
rebuilding the
much.
bridge anyway.
So, and part of the bridge project, okay,
the
but I
project's been
just don't see that as an area where there's not adequate room, given the traffic level there, for cyclists.
And-
Falls Road is a critical thing.
and frankly, these other bikeways, which this is actually the next item, next piece of this. Again, you're right. Every year, the executive tries to delay the project 3 or 4 years, and every year we put it back because it's been a council priority.
Become easy.
And this back and forth's been going on for close to a decade on some of these, including Falls Road. So again, this reflects what the council's program is, CIP is, and they ought to be in the top tier.
Uh-huh,
So.
okay.
All right,
We're
we're good?
Well,
We're good.
I don't know if Mr. Hucker heard, or Mr. Berlin, did you hear all of that or not? But
I think
We're good.
that we've achieved nothing, no change.
We're good.
Perfect.
No changes.
no, this actually I'm recommending.
Except, yeah, no change.
Here, let me start again. I won't start over.
No,
from the
we're
beginning.
good. Go
The
ahead. Just go to the
recommendation
next
is
one.
that Goshen Road be removed from the programmed list, which is on page 150,
I think.
because
Ms.
it's not
Florine has
programmed
been-
anymore.
Ms. Florine has been convinced of the merits of your argument.
No, but there was a whole other conversation that you missed because you were talking to Mr. Hucker, so I need to talk about that. And add Gold Mine Road Bridge to that list on page 150, and then on page 152, the Tier 1 bikeways include all those 8 that are in the table in the middle of the page, because these are all projects that have been programmed.
Already been,
Okay, you are?
Good.
Okay. Just for the record, Mr. Hucker, you missed the first 2 votes. Are you okay with the changes that Chairman Anderson presented on reflecting what the council wanted last week, which was to eliminate the references to specific implementation years, that the text not guarantee that all bikeways be built, even those are built and may not be specified, and also that no bikeway would be built that would cause any part of the SSP then applicable transportation test to fail. It's in the material on page 1 through 5. You're okay with that? And then, again, back in late August, I believe, DOT,
Glenn, what's the implication? Does that language fix the concern we had last week?
Yeah, I
about the
believe it does.
implication on the impact tax?
no, it doesn't do that, but we can talk about that. Still what will happen is if there is a master plan bikeway, which is part of which the Park and Planning would require them to build as part of their subdivision approval because it's right there where their development is, that will be a credit against their impact tax under current law, and that's less money that's available for other things, if it adds capacity. That's right. And so an example that came up very recently, in fact, the GO committee talked about this just last week, was that Cabin Branch development is having to widen a section of West Old Baltimore Road. Part of that is to add a hiker-biker trail on the north side of it. They will get a credit for that, even though that is in Tier 5 in this plan. It's basically at the end of time. This happens now and then. I'll use the word now and then rather than frequently. We don't know what the impact would be fiscally because until the developments show up, we don't know what's going to be asked for credit and what would deserve a credit. I would say that for the bikeways we're talking about in like downtown Bethesda and Silver Spring, to the extent that that work is being done within the current curbs, and it's just a matter of losing a parking lane or even some cases losing a travel lane, and just repurposing the street, there's very little in the way of, in fact, almost no construction there, and so they wouldn't get a credit for that. And that's kind of typical for what happens in the CBDs. But in greenfield areas and more suburban areas where there's development still to happen and a hiker-biker trail is called for, or separated bike lanes, or whatever else is needed to expand to that, to include whatever's in the master plan, they'll get a credit for that.
Right, so what's the estimated fiscal impact?
We have no estimate,
Right,
none.
Mr. Anderson?
Well, I think our view is that this is an SSP question, not a master plan question. That the rules are, as you know, DOT and the council have established a practice with who pays for what and under what circumstances, and that can change. And in fact, I think that the planning board probably would support the idea of looking at when impact tax credits are appropriate, but that's like, that's a sort of on a separate track. It's just how we deal with the, payment system
It's a
for.
very related track, though.
It's related, but I think Dr. Orland would agree that it's generally not something, like in the master plan of highways, for example, it doesn't say turn lanes will be paid for by, developers whose project's necessitated or not. It just says this is infrastructure that should be accommodated or planned for, and then the SSP governs the rules for who has to build it or when and how much they have to pay.
When, I'm fortunate I didn't bring this with me, but if you go back and look at the packet from the first work session, you'll notice the fiscal impact there is, the larger proportion of the costs are direct county costs to build a bikeway, but there's also what's called a private cost, which was assumed to be built by the developers as part of the project. That largely would be credited against impact tax, based on what's in the plan, because they get credit for that. But again, at the end of the day, it ends up being not what's in the plan for that particular bikeway, but the follow-up design of it, and DOT may find that it's really not feasible, and so it ends up being a lesser bikeway than what's in the plan. The plan itself, I got to use the word, is aspirational. It says this is what we'd like to have.
Could we
We'll
just
try
say
for
the plan
that.
is a ceiling and not a floor?
Okay, it's a ceiling, not a floor. And so it may not reach the ceiling, okay? It may be half a ceiling in terms of what the bikeway is that's built. And in which case, if it's not adding it's not causing any real construction to happen, then they won't get a credit. So that's all we can really say about this.
If it's helpful, I mean, we get the application to certify the impact tax credits, and one of the things we do is to look at whether or not something new was built or not is the first step. We don't issue credit for somebody reusing the infrastructure we already have in a different way. And if it is new, the next thing we would do is look to the master plan, in this case the bike master plan, to see if that facility is called for. If it is, we generally presume that it's providing capacity because the master plan wouldn't call for it if it weren't a critical link in that network. And then we would look at the costs of that project and certify a credit for it. We would not be certifying credits for bike facilities within the heart of a development on residential streets. It tends to only be on the arterial network. As Dr. Orland pointed out, there's no question that they may not be implemented in the priority that we would implement them in because a developer is going to build the facility when he's building a project, not at some other time. So that's really the fiscal impact, is that instead of the money being in the prioritized program, it's in the opportunistic program to get the facilities when somebody's out there building them. We don't know the magnitude of that because it depends who's building what, where, and when, and what facilities they're conditioned to build. Generally, we don't get a lot of requests for standalone bike path credits. They're usually in concert with widening a road or doing some other work. So I wish I could be more definitive on the magnitude of the issue, but I just wanted to give some context for how this works within the department.
Do you have any estimate for the impact tax credits you've given in the last couple of years for?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Can you get us those?
I can research that for you.
Thank you.
And I think it might also be helpful for future councils to know how often this takes place, and so for you to report to this committee, Dr. Orlin, anytime that impact taxes are used for this purpose, so that people can monitor it and make judgments as to whether or not there needs to be changes to our impact tax law if people are uncomfortable with it. But an ongoing monitoring system, I think, would be helpful to future councils to understand the cost-benefit ratio here.
I know DPS keeps a record of credits that are granted. But basically, the way it works is the developer asks for, through DPS, and then DPS refers it to DOT, and DOT.
We certify the eligibility and amount of the credits, and DPS administers how they're applied.
But if you, once you certify it, if you can just send that on to the
The
committee.
GO committee asked for similar information last week, so we're all right.
Good.
Try to get that.
So Mr. Hucker and future councils will be in a position to assess whether or not any modifications are necessary. Okay?
Okay, the next, towards the bottom of page 2, there's also 5 projects which are in facility planning currently in the CIP, bikeways. And as you can see, they're currently characterized in the draft plan as being either in Tier 3, 4, or 5, depending on the bikeway we're talking about. And I'm recommending these all be upgraded to Tier 2 because, again, in terms of how quickly they're likely to be implemented, they're right behind the ones in the middle of the page, which are already funded for construction.
Without
So I'm
objection.
recommending all those go to Tier 2. You might recall when we did the master plan of highways and transitways this past summer, there was one section requesting that, or stating that the rights-of-way of certain roads should be widened, the master plan rights-of-way should be widened because of the bikeways in this plan. At the time, we said that was premature because, we haven't reviewed this plan, we should take it up now. Take it up when the bikeway plans comes up, and here it is. Basically, on circles 21 and 22, there are a relatively small set of master plan rights-of-way that are being recommended to be widened. Some of them as little as 2 feet, the most is 10 feet, and I think they're worthwhile, and I recommend approval of those.
Without objection.
Okay, the rest of the work sessions about individual bikeway comments that we've received from the public or from the public, really. The one we've received the most comments on are Fenton Street and Grove Street. And the final draft recommends separated bike lanes on Fenton Street between Wayne Avenue and King Street in Silver Spring. And it's in Tier 1, which is a priority Tier 1, which is actually the highest priority amongst those bikeways which aren't already programmed. Right now, the street has 2 parking lanes. It has 1 travel lane in each direction and a center turn lane. And those lanes are already about as narrow as they can be right now. So it's likely that the result of providing separated bike lanes would be one of 3 things, or maybe a combination. Eliminating continuous left turn lanes, so you just have 1 lane in each direction, and then left turning vehicles are in the same lane as cars they're trying to go through, or eliminating one of the 2 parking lanes, or reconstructing and widening the road to allow additional space for the separated bike lanes, but again, then you're encroaching into the sidewalk area. As part of this recommendation, you also look at Grove Street, which is a residential street just to the west, just to the east of Fenton Street in the East Silver Spring neighborhood. It's a secondary residential street, and it runs between Bonifant and Sligo Avenue. It has 1 lane in each direction, has parking on one side, the east side. And the final draft recommends that Grove Street be part of the neighborhood greenway. DOT's been looking at this for a number of months, maybe up to a year or so. And I'd asked them to give a short presentation as to where they are with the study. There have been comments pro and con on this. The bicycle community very much wants the separated bike lanes on Fenton Street. And most of the bike traffic that's coming up from the Metropolitan Branch Trail is using Fenton Street now, despite the fact that Grove Street next to it is designated as a bikeway. However, the folks living in the neighborhood, East Silver Spring neighborhood, are opposed to taking away the bike lanes, or including the separated bike lanes, because they're afraid, again, of either taking away parking for the merchants or encroaching on the sidewalks, or taking away the turn lane in the middle, which will make congestion that much more on Fenton Street, pushing more traffic, cut-through traffic effectively on Grove Street, particularly truck traffic. Now, you recall that we do have a cut-through traffic ordinance, which, actually not an ordinance, it's a regulation, which under circumstances, through traffic can be prevented from using that street, either through turn restrictions or actual physical diverters. And DOT even has the authority to prohibit or restrict trucks on a street like Grove Street under the current law. But with that, let me turn it over to Chris, and he'll lead the briefing.
Hi, John Thomas and Matt Johnson are here from DOT to sort of give you an overview of the work that's been going on here. We started this work under the BIPA program with a look to implement bike facilities on these corridors. We're keenly aware of the neighborhood issues. Matt in particular has been in conversations with the neighborhood over the last year, and the truck cut-through issues on Grove Street are problematic, and we continue to work to address that. It is restricted to trucks currently, but it's violated on a pretty regular basis. So we're taking another look at that to see if we can do more in the short term. Our study is on hold for this quarter because we realized that there are a number of issues related to parking, loading, and service of the businesses that we can't really get a good hold on until the Lot 3 garage is open, which should be later this year, and until we know our trajectory on Garage 4, which is only a portion of that facility, is open. So the parking conditions in this neighborhood are more challenged than they would normally be. So we've paused the study while we do that and get a better assessment of traffic conditions, but we'll kind of review where we are with the work. And the purpose of us going over this is not to decide which is the best configuration on this corridor today, but to give a sense of the types of evaluation that we're doing as these corridors come forward, because this is maybe a year ahead of other bike master plan studies, but would follow a similar course. So without further talking by me, I'll introduce these gentlemen to walk through what's been done.
Good afternoon. I'm John Thomas, Planning Manager for DOT Engineering. Just quick overview again. Thanks for having us, and then I'll have Matt go into the details. This is not a unique process, unique to Fenton Street, so everything that we talk about is the process that we go through, taking these lines on the map in the master plan or the dots on the map in the master plan and taking them to implementation. So whether it's facility planning or a standalone CIP, whether it's a bikeways minor CIP or Matt's bike ped priority area CIP, this is the process that we go through. Nothing, rarely, almost anything ever fits cleanly and neatly into a corridor. So DOT is supportive of these master plan alignments. Once we get funded for implementation in the CIP, then we go through this process. So if it doesn't fit, then we figure out a way to shift things back and forth. So that's what Matt's going to briefly talk about, but it's not unique to Fenton.
Thank you. Matt Johnson. I'm a project manager with Department of Transportation, Division of Transportation Engineering. And just kind of go through about where we are roughly with this corridor, which really is both Fenton and Grove Street. As you can see on the map, and as you're familiar, the bike master plan recommends a separated bike lane on Fenton and a neighborhood greenway on Grove Street, which is a new concept in Montgomery County. We have always taken a holistic approach to this corridor. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing deals with the issues that we've heard from the businesses and from the community, and also from the cyclists who are using this corridor, who want to use this corridor. So one of the things that we want to look at is, how do we deal with the Grove Street cut-through traffic issue, the truck issue, and how do we deal with fitting a safe bike facility on Fenton Street? So that's kind of what we're looking through. I would point out that just because it's in the master plan, as Dr. Orland mentioned earlier, does not necessarily mean that it's going to be implemented. This is something that we're going to go to the community and at some point at the end of the study and also during the design process, and it may be determined that it's not politically feasible or it's not technically feasible. But at this point, we're trying to study what's possible in the corridor.
What would happen with business parking there?
Well, we have looked at different concepts for what might be possible in the corridor. There are different scenarios that.
And that's a lot of, they've always been, the community is railed against a lot of the sidewalk cutouts and stuff that have occurred over the years.
Yeah,
It's a big issue.
Matt will show you, there's a variety of options here, some which impact the parking.
Yeah,
very
how can
concerned
it
about
not? This,
And there are others that are.
I mean, it's supposed to be a way you can travel from point A to point B. There is that. I mean, that's a road part.
There are others that are more expensive that retain essentially everything that's provided by that street today. So
Yeah, so skipping ahead a little bit in the presentation, what I would say is we don't have a design at this point. It's really important to point out that we are just very early in the process, but what we have looked at is what fits in the street now and what could fit if we change some different parameters. What you see is that the street currently is 44 feet from curb to curb right now, and Dr. Orland already kind of went through what the sections look like. But there's a continuous left turn lane, there are 2 through travel lanes, and there's parking on both sides. So one of the concepts, and again, these are just concepts to see what fits in the corridor, looks at what happens if we, sorry, this mouse is very sensitive. What happens if we were to look at shrinking the tree boxes by 2 feet on either side of the road? That would give us an extra 4 feet to work with. And with that, we can still retain turn lanes at the intersections, which is where most of the turning traffic happens. And we still retain parking along virtually all of the corridor. This allows us to fit in a 10-foot wide separated bike lane with a 2-foot buffer, which is more than our minimums, but probably if we're expecting a decent amount of bike traffic here, might be a reasonable width. Another option, this option only looks at moving the curb 2 feet on the west side of the street, as an example. This would not cut into the sidewalk space, it would just require shrinking the tree boxes. And this would give us enough room to have 2 4-foot bike lanes and a 2-foot buffer. We still retain 7-foot parking lanes on both sides throughout the corridor, and we actually widen the travel lanes to 11 feet. We keep the turn lane at the intersections. So there are different ways of looking at this. Another option, this is looking at what if we don't move the curbs and
Could I
we get
stop
rid.
you for a moment?
Yes.
I am interested in the shrinking the size of the, what did you describe it as?
The tree boxes.
The tree boxes, because I have seen some very small tree boxes in other communities. So I am curious as to what led us to believe that this size is what's necessary, and whether you're comfortable, and whether we've talked to DEP, and whether we're comfortable that we can in fact shrink them, because I have seen many other communities that have very small tree boxes, and the trees seem to be doing just fine.
At this point, this is just looking at conceptually, like, what if we had 2 extra feet to work with, what could we do? And where would that space come from? We haven't gotten to the point of design where we would be dealing with those issues. We think that narrower tree boxes will still be able to support trees. We potentially, if we're going to be rebuilding the curb here, we might do other sort of stormwater management issues that maybe weren't available 20 years ago when the street was rebuilt. So we don't know at this point, but that's something we can hear from the community potentially as well. What do they want to get out of this? Do they want any kind of other features along the green panel here?
Could I ask also, you said this, there still would be a turn lane at the intersection.
Yes.
How long a turn lane are you talking about? 1 car length, 2 car lanes, 3 car lanes?
That's something that we would work out at the design process based on, we would look at what the turning volumes are at these intersections.
Oh, right.
The longer the turn lane is, the less parking that we would have close to the corners, but
That would be the trade-off.
those are trade-offs, yes.
Parking for,
Well, when is the time, again, this is a, like, conceptual issue, right? We're not looking at something happening immediately.
this is priority tier 1, so once this study gets back up and going again, we're talking about a design of something that'll get built the next couple of years.
But we're also hearing, if I understood it correctly, that notwithstanding that we would put it in our master plan in this manner, that if DOT comes back and says, we can't do this, it doesn't happen.
Whatever it is, I'm saying, it might be nothing.
Right.
It might be one of these options.
correct. That'll be the result of this first phase of work in the corridor.
So the master plan, in effect, states our desire, our priority, assuming that it, in fact, can happen, even taking into account political realities, as I heard you say.
That's correct. I mean,
So it's not a judgment we are being asked to make now as to whether or not it ultimately will happen. We're saying we'd like it to happen if, in fact, all these other things can be worked out. Is that a fair characterization?
That's generally true. I mean, the only thing I'd say is that the Silver Spring Bicycle Pedestrian Priority Area projects, which this is part of, is entirely funded within the next 4 to 5 years of the CIP.
So these are
So-
decisions that will have to be
It
made.
will be made, and probably sooner than later. Not with this council, and it'll be the next council. And again, we don't know what the result is, that's why they're doing the study, but whatever it is, and there is agreement technically and politically, then you were saying this might happen for a number of years. All I'm saying is, no, I think it's going to happen actually a lot quicker than that,
No,
whatever it is.
Right, and I wasn't speaking to when it will happen. What I was speaking to is that the decision that counts, the committee is making now, is saying, this would be good if we can make it happen, and they will determine if we can make it happen.
That's right.
And
We
it'll
stay
be
on
a
that
public process that we go through all of these challenges with the public and talk through each of them. I mean, there's other scenarios, but the point is,
You're
we
looking
go
at
through
all.
each,
You're
all of the
looking
above.
at
We go through
assessing
loading, business access, parking, trees, stormwater, utilities, cost, all of those things, bring those back to the public along with the traffic assessment with respect to the intersection scenarios, and then make a best-case decision.
Mr. Hucker?
Can you guys restate or elaborate on what led you to suspend the study to begin with?
Right now, the Lot 3 garage, Studio Plaza, is not open, and it's creating more parking pressure in this neighborhood than we might
familiar with
expect to
that,
see
yep.
under normal circumstances.
It's just that?
It's that, and we did not have all the traffic data that we needed to fully evaluate these things, and we didn't want to collect that data until the garage was open. And we are also looking internally to see what our plans are for Garage 4, which only a portion of is open. So there's a lot of circumstances here that caused us to put the study on hold.
Garage 4 is the one at Sligo Avenue, and
And you anticipate moving forward with the study?
The first parking garage is opening up later this year, so
Okay.
it wouldn't be before the spring at the earliest that we would be restarting work on this.
It would take you how long after you've done?
It's going to take a while because we have a lot of community process to go through to really make sure we've got these issues ironed out and have an idea of what the best facility is. It's probably a year's planning effort. I know Glenn thinks it's going to happen quickly, but we have a lot of dialogue to have on this particular corridor.
quickly in terms of, compared to everything else in
scale of
this
quick.
master plan, it's quickly, it's not,
It's
So-
like immediate.
We also have Pepco construction issues and there's a lot going on here that have caused us to slow this down dramatically.
So if that's in Tier 1, but it's suspended, does it need to stay in Tier 1?
I think it is still a Tier 1 facility because of the connections that are provided by it. It is a very significant bicycle link between the Metropolitan Branch Trail and Veterans Plaza and the parts of Silver Springs CBD that aren't adjacent to Metro.
it's actually in priority Tier 1, which is even higher than Tier 1. It's on page
Doesn't,
152.
that doesn't mean we won't finish other facilities before it because of the challenges with implementation of this, but it is a very high priority corridor for us.
We kind of skipped over Grove Street in this, skipping over to the sections, but one of the things that we're hoping to work on in 2019 is to do a community input, planning study, and design work for a neighborhood greenway along Grove Street. This is in the bike plan. We feel that this is a good corridor to sort of start our neighborhood greenway program on because it deals with some of the neighborhood issues that we've already heard, which is that there's cut-through traffic, there's a lack of sidewalks in this street, it's a route to school for children. And so this would be a way for us to implement some temporary type measures that we can use as demonstration or prototype type treatments and work with the communities. They have a pilot period of 3 or 6 months, something like that. If treatments don't work, we can remove them, or we can modify them, or we can relocate them. And if they do work, we can make them permanent over the long term. And so the idea would be that we want to try and deal with this Grove Street issue sooner rather than later. One of the concerns that we've heard from the community is that with the Pepco construction coming, Pepco is probably going to be on Fenton Street within the next, in Fenton Village within the next year to 2 years, doing underground transmission lines. The community is very concerned that that construction is going to drive traffic into the neighborhood. So we want to see if we can get something on the ground prior to that happening so we can deal with some of these issues proactively.
What do you mean by greenway? Exactly.
It's best for David to answer the question.
Hi, David Ansbacher. Excuse me. A neighborhood greenway is a low-stress, comfortable bicycling experience. It should be available to all different types of people on.
What about the road part?
It's on the roadway.
It's on the roadway.
It's on residential streets. It's a series of traffic calming and traffic diversion measures to
I mean,
reduce the
you know,
amount of through
in
traffic on these.
that neck, I used to live there. In that neck of the woods, like to get to the elementary school, there are lots of one-way streets that have been created to protect those neighborhoods from through traffic. And as a result, it forces people onto other, like Wayne Avenue and other streets, depending on your destination. I mean, you have to make it possible for people within the neighborhood to get from point A to point B and then on to wherever that they need to go.
That's correct.
So-
Closing the street.
So, I mean, that's all I would say. I've never been a fan of people having to get to point A, from point A to point B rapidly, but I do think they need to be able to get there. That would be at least my concern, not not to speed things up, but just to not eliminate the opportunity to move. Because otherwise, people are forced onto very difficult situations. And this is a neighborhood already struggling with the Purple Line stuff and how that's changing their expectations of how they're going to move. And they're not, some people need to drive places. It's okay.
It is okay, and that's one of the main reasons we want to pilot some ideas before we make any
So-
permanent changes to
So
the,
you're not talking about eliminating the road?
no.
Or, I mean, making it one way or that sort of thing? Okay.
The typology, the names keep changing, but if you remember years ago, we used to call it a Type 3 bikeway. And they was called a shared use roadway. It's basically saying bikes are allowed to be in the same space as the.
Well, I'm thinking
What
of
this
the
does is-
Bethesda Greenway stuff that's largely green.
This is quite different than,
Well, I'm just saying.
That's why it's confusing.
That's why
Less green, it's more paved.
I urge caution in our use of
It's a
language.
paved
here.
way.
it's a paved way.
It's a paved way.
Yeah, yeah.
Might be painted green, but.
Green for go.
Okay.
All right?
Any other questions? Otherwise, let Glenn move on with the packet.
I know I'm going to be asked. Either of these projects make sense to me by themselves. Why the need to have enhanced bike throughway on Fenton and then the similar infrastructure on Grove when they're one block apart and parallel?
Councilman Hucker, to that I would say that we think that these corridors serve different purposes and they complement each other rather than being substitutes for each other. One of the things that we have looked at as part of our traffic study already is we did bike counts in 2017. And there are more than twice as many people biking today on Fenton Street than on Grove Street, despite it being a signed bike route. So I think what the takeaway from that is that Fenton Street is more direct for cyclists, and it goes to the places that they want to go. They may be going to these businesses along Fenton Street. They may be going to places that are on Fenton as opposed to being in the neighborhood. Now, there are people, of course, who do bike into the neighborhood, who live there or who are biking through the neighborhood, and that's why both of these connections are important. But I think, the fact that we have more than twice as many people biking on Fenton Street today than on Grove is a really good indicator that we need to try and provide safe accommodations, if possible, on that street.
I'd just say, from the Grove Street point of view, the road is not a designed road. It's a road that exists. And there's really not a design solution to deal with everything that road's trying to do.
Which might explain the higher bike count on Fenton,
Which does explain.
which would attract bikes to
Or should
Grove
not.
if you have a low-stress environment on Grove.
Right, so the idea of the Greenway is to get Grove Street to behave in a way that's complementary to the physical infrastructure that's there, that's very limited, and address the community and household access needs that it serves. And it's really not all that suitable for other traffic uses.
Right.
So that's why both are together.
But I think part of the reason for the Greenway idea is not just for bikes, but it's to create a better street and a calmer street.
Right.
So it's more consistent with a neighborhood street, which obviously is what some people are concerned about, like the trucks. It's designed, and cut-through traffic. It's designed, you're not going to block off the street, to Ms. Florian's point, but you're going to make it a street that is slower, that is more hospitable to other people and things other than the cars trying to get
Right.
bypass
I think
the
the Grove Street Greenway makes a lot of sense, and I think doing that and moving forward with it, and, you may not even need to keep that in the Fenton study. To me, that addresses a lot of the bike traffic challenge without the challenges on Fenton Street.
Well, I think you're going to find that, I
Oh,
won't
yeah.
speak for all of them, but bicyclists, and I think it's something Mr. Collins just alluded to, Fenton Street connects the destinations people want to reach through the central business district. Grove Street, not so much. I mean, I'm not sure, if you had to choose between them, I understand there's more conflicts with Fenton and more trade-offs, but if you were going to pick one, I think you'd pick Fenton as far as its function for bicycling is concerned, because it connects the Metropolitan Branch Trail down at Montgomery College to,
Yeah, Tom is right.
We're all cyclists. That's not the only constituency, and it does create other problems. And certainly when the Spring Street lane went in, part of what was said then was that would connect to the Met Branch Trail without the need to do the lane on Fenton Street because of Grove.
that I don't know.
Now,
All I
if that's changed, the thinking's changed, then
Well, I think that people use the Spring Street bike lane because particularly people who don't like to be riding down Georgia Avenue
Right.
at the northern end of the
in a
CBD.
high-stress environment.
Yeah, and the
like
Fenton Street
Georgia
doesn't
and
even
Fenton.
go all the way through, but I think particularly as far as Montgomery College and that area is concerned, I think that Fenton Street, it's very important. As you say, there are other constituencies besides bicycles, and that's why I think what these guys are saying is, yeah, we need to look at parking, we need to look at the turn traffic. The only other thing I'd say in addition to what they've already covered is the ultimate answer may be different in different segments of the street. It doesn't, obviously there has to be some continuity to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be exactly the same treatment on every block. You may decide that on one block, the access to businesses to have on-street parking is really super important and there's no substitute for it. A couple blocks down, you may have a different situation where the garage is right next to it, or there's other conditions which would lead you to think maybe we could give up the parking. So I think that's why, and they can speak for themselves on this if they'd like, but that's why I think what they're saying is we need to study this some more. Again, I come back to this is a ceiling, not a floor. So accounting for all those other trade-offs and constituencies, we want to at least provide the opportunity that it could go up to this level. It might not get to that level once all those other trade-offs are made, but that's why they do the study to implement it as opposed to trying to decide in October now, I guess, of 2018, what is the right answer for every linear foot of this, segment of roadway.
And what I heard you say is that this will take a year to study, so it starts in spring of 2019, and spring of 2020, for purpose of this conversation, you'll have come to your conclusion, and I assume the results of your work will be transmitted to this council before moving forward. Is that correct?
Depending on the outcome, it may rise to being a standalone project, which would require this council's approval. If it's a lower cost alternative, it may fit within existing funding, but otherwise it would need a supplemental CIP to move forward.
So future councils this next council will have the opportunity to review the results of your analysis as to whether or not this goal can be met in this manner or in some other alternative approach. So you may, Mr. President.
Thanks, sir. I'd like it to come on, but I'm assuming it's on.
No, don't assume that on that one.
I do hope we will complete, I look forward to the study. But I have been very anxious since we first came up with this proposal that our will to follow through and build the network that we've envisioned will falter once we get to a part of the circle that is, more challenging to work through. So, I know that some have raised concerns and we'll need to understand those concerns and how to resolve them. But, I really think we need to build the whole network because it works when it's all built. When you have just a portion of it built like we have now, it doesn't really have the same impact. And so people say, well, why aren't there more riders on that network? When I see, that protected lane, I don't see someone in it at all times. I think that relates to the people who maybe live on the other side of town and their inclination to ride into town as well. So once we build the entire loop, then I think we start to get people coming in from every different radius or radial entry, and I think it'll be much stronger. So I do think Grove is part of the solution, and I think we ought to understand what it can provide. So I'm glad we're going to evaluate everything, but I just want to say I never thought this part of it would be easy. and I'm prepared for a challenging conversation, and I think we have to, be willing to do that, so.
So the question is, what do you want to say in the master plan about this? So my recommendation is to concur with the final draft and say there'd be, again, this is a ceiling. The ceiling is using the chair's term.
What are the words we're looking at, Glenn?
Well, top
And
of
the-
page 4, I'm just saying.
No, but I mean, in the actual master plan language.
If you go to a couple different places. Okay, hold on. Silver Spring, Tacoma. Okay, on page, first of all, for Grove Street, it would be on page, where is it? It's not there. I'm looking in the section of Silver Spring Tacoma Park East. Oh, there it is. It's on page 353. It says Grove Street from Bonifant Street to Sligo Avenue, Neighborhood Greenway. And then for Fenton Street,
Well, that's all it says.
that's all it says.
It doesn't get
The
into,
shared road is that, it's just what has been described to you. It's just taking the existing road
Okay.
and making it a nicer street for bikes and cars to both be on in the same place.
I don't get that
Uh,
there's a controversy on Grove Street.
Pardon me?
I don't get that there's a controversy on Grove.
Okay, well,
No,
I'm going,
not
this
with
is as I
that
find them.
language.
Silver Springs CBD, this is on page, it's extended. There it is, it's at bottom of page 349. See Fenton Street from Wayne Avenue to King Street, separated bike lanes.
that's the more determinative.
Where's the,
Terminology.
is there language anywhere that speaks to the process that DOT is using? Does one have an asterisk saying, subject to X, Y, Z?
Every,
They're all subject to.
they're all
subject
subject
to
to
that.
every link and every part of every bikeway. So
And
there's
is
no,
that written someplace so that,
Page 137 and 138 speaks through implementation through capital improvements program.
Okay, so it doesn't say anything. So you should say, why don't we add language that says these bikeway types, I guess, are aspirational, but not determinative.
well.
it does have
the
number 2,
language
it
that-
says, determine if space is sufficient to implement a master plan.
But that's not, that's just space, it's not all the other considerations. I mean, it might be something you could fit in there, but there might be other competing interests. Like, for example, Fenton Street, you have all those little small shops and everything.
We have a suggestion.
Yeah, you have language already, I think. In the language that the chair provided, on Circle 3, maybe this is it or maybe not, on page 1, towards the top of Circle 3 in this packet, page 148, the network of bikeways and bicycle parking facilities, parking recommended in the bicycle plan is extensive. As previously discussed, is not likely to be fully constructed, partly because of the budget limitations, partly because the plan identifies redundant options to ensure the goal of community connectivity can be achieved.
It still doesn't say, well, we may choose not to do it for other reasons.
Well, may not, it says as previously discussed, is not likely to be fully constructed. All the elements
Because
of
of
the plan.
budgets
Partly because of the
and
budget.
because of
partly
redundant options. And, or it doesn't say, or because we've rethought this whole concept. The network is
Subject
is
to-
extensive, but as previously discussed,
Yes,
is not
it's
likely to be
the
fully
budget.
constructed based on a wide variety of conversations, or something like that.
Can I suggest not adding language? I'm thinking about in terms of the broader aspect of what a master plan is. When you adopt a master plan, any master plan, it's basically saying this is what we want to happen. And so if a council later were to say, oh, no, we don't want this to happen, ever, regardless, you should be amending the master plan.
Well, the problem
and-
with that approach, Glenn, is that they are viewed by some increasingly as Bibles, A. And 2, language is important. And we haven't gone through each and every one of these and said, yeah, exactly, this is exactly what we want. We say, well, it's worth, we're saying up here, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's worth a shot. But not necessarily, I don't know that we all feel that is always the right solution for that neighborhood every single last time. They may feel that way, but we're the ones who have to, the council, the future councils will be responsible for those decisions. And what they would say to us, quite legitimately, is say, well, it's in the master plan, people get over it.
And what if we added language to that phrase?
Language, if I could just.
Well, Glenn was lurching towards a solution here.
The purpose of proposing an extensive network of bikeways is to identify options for bikeways that should be constructed if possible to achieve the goal, blah, blah, blah. The plan does not assume that every proposed bikeway in the master plan will be constructed. And there's other places where we put in language about budget and about the SSP. The only thing we haven't included yet.
Where was that language that you were?
That's what you just approved, that we provided the language, and you all just voted 20 minutes ago in Circle 1 to add it. Because that was in response to your direction.
That was our
from
point before.
the last workshop. The only,
That issue was, don't assume us to do it within the time frame that you had proposed.
it says, we do not assume that it will all be built, period.
And we took out time frames as well.
And it specifically refers elsewhere to budget and the SSP. The only thing that we've talked about this afternoon that is not expressly addressed in that language is parking. And we have a suggestion on that, if that's your will, which is the language that's on 137 bullet 3, which is at what? Circle?
137, I'm sorry, of the packet, what document are we working off of?
So the language that we're going to provide is not in your packet. It's some additional language that would modify page 137.
It would be on page 137 bullet 3.
Bear with us a second.
You've just approved some changes to the language on page 137, bullet 3, and this would be some additional changes that are not in your packet.
Okay?
What does it say?
I think here you go.
And it would add removal of on-street parking to a list of considerations about road diets, and then says, if sufficient space can be repurposed, et cetera, the project should begin with more detailed design following the master plan recommendation. The relevant subdivision staging policy requirements in effect at the time of implementation must be satisfied. Furthermore, as with any transportation project, when removal of on-street parking is under consideration, analysis of supply and demand for parking area must be evaluated, et cetera, et cetera. So it would specifically say,
Thank
you have to study whether there's sufficient alternative parking. And
Mr.
This is
Hucker's
Mr.
recommendation
Hucker's language.
I'm willing to recommend this.
does have your name on it, I just,
That's convenient.
You could, do you have?
we have been working with Mr. Hucker's staff to try to, anticipating this might come up, to try to read your minds,
thank you.
to come up with something that would recognize the legitimacy of this concern.
In
And
response to constituent concerns.
in response to constituent concerns, precisely.
Oh,
That's better.
I'm good with this language. There was one other point that was raised in looking at Fenton Street, which is the left turn issue.
Ed Wayne?
I believe you have on Fenton, you have one lane that is a left turn lane only, is that correct?
Well, and currently there is.
Yes.
And in some of the alternatives for this, it's retained, and others it's not. But that would be part of the selection process for what the preferred configuration is whether or not those traffic impacts can be managed or if we need the left turn.
And do you have,
We don't have a proposal today.
But that's covered under, we talked
That's
about
covered already?
traffic, SSP, congestion, that's all within that earlier language that we provided to be responsive to your last work session direction.
And the staff clarified that where the left turn, if the left turn were left in, just as a left turn lane and not as a continuous left turn, what would be lost is the parking spaces on either side. So it wouldn't be the sidewalk, it wouldn't be the bike lanes, and it wouldn't be all the parking spaces, it'd just be the ones where the left turn bay is, so it would be relatively few.
well, I'm good with this language.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. All right, let's move forward.
All right. Okay, next, near the top of page 4, Cedar Lane and Summit Avenue, this is the section of the road between Beach Drive going north to Knowles Avenue in the Parkwood area and Chevy Chase View. The plan calls for a side path along this section of the road, 10-foot wide side path with a buffer between it and the roadway. It's recommended as part of Tier 3, so it's something that would be happening in the longer-term future. It's relatively low priority. Currently, Cedar Lane has a travel lane in each direction, there's parking lanes on both sides, and sidewalks on both sides. The folks, we received comments from 3 individuals living in that neighborhood, and they're worried about the loss of on-street parking. If the bikeway is widened and the curbs are moved over, some are concerned about other issues there as well. One individual recommended that why not just use the Rock Creek Bike Trail and come up Knowles Avenue. That ends up being a route that's nearly twice as long and would take about 60% longer to bike, according to Google Maps. I think it'd be very difficult to create a side path that would require a buffer that's even one as narrow as 8 feet. And so my recommendation actually here is to do this, which is that for the Summit Avenue section of it, which is the part that's closer to Knowles Avenue, have that be a side path. And it probably would be on the side where, backing up to HOC, where there's right-of-way really is available for
You're
much of
saying
it.
on the sidewalk.
Take the sidewalk and make it a bike path. Essentially widen it from 5 feet to 10 feet. And to make sure that it's
You're going
separated
to
off from
reopen
the
that
curb.
sometime as a school. Don't assume HOC is going to stay there.
Well, even then, it's just along the edge of the what would be the ball field. It wouldn't take much right of way there at all.
And then where would it
Then
go?
on Cedar Lane, where it turns into Cedar Lane, I think you could have separated bike lanes, but you can only do that really if you take away a parking on one side.
You got a problem down at the church.
I knew that would come up.
Yeah,
That's the only place along that whole right of way.
that's where there's all the, people really don't park that much on Cedar Lane, except down there, which they do a lot.
Yeah, this would put a crimp on that. Again, we're talking long-term future here, but nevertheless, it would put a crimp on that. But I don't see actually the ability to actually widen and put a hiker-biker trail along that section. It's just, and it's certainly not take away parking. You take away parking there because the density of housing is much less than the density closer to Kensington.
But that's a busy road, and so people have company. There's no place for folks to park.
There's park on the other side of the street where there still would be a parking lane, and they would have to cross at a crosswalk at one of the intersections.
Do we have to put this in every single road?
No. But this is a busy road, and
Until we build Summit Avenue, I think that's next week.
next
I mean, that's it's a nightmare, in which we have to have an obligation to address up there, by Summit and Knowles. So to suggest that's an easy solution, it ain't.
it's not easy.
And the idea of there's a swimming pool there, big community activity. Of course, you want people to be able to walk to it. I think they can contain most of their parking on site, but the church cannot, down by the park, even if they use up all the parking on Park and Planning property, which Park and Planning would probably prefer that they did not. So, why do we have this as a decision point?
Well, let me just quickly speak to the need. So it is a direct connection between downtown Kensington and major employment center of NIH and
Yeah, I know,
Naval
I know.
Hospital. There is a strong need to connect people in those two locations. We're not saying that it would be easy. It is Tier 3, so this is, way out in the future, but it is an important connection.
So anyway, you have the two recommendations, the one from the final draft, which says it should be a side path the entire way, right? And then my recommendation is that it be a separated bike lanes on the Cedar Lane portion, but a side path on Summit Avenue part of it,
I'm with the neighborhood.
which is not to have
Nothing.
it at all.
Mr. Henderson, do you have a view with respect to Dr. Orland's recommendation?
We still think we're right, but we don't feel like fighting about it with him because we think it's important one or the other get built. And again, all these points about it being a busy road are true, but that's why they need safe bicycling accommodations. And especially that area is kind of a choke point to get across the county, east-west. It's like, just like the road connections in this county. We don't have good east-west connections, and Kensington is kind of, you know, in the middle of all that. That's just physically what we're working with.
It's not easy. There are some neighborhood streets that can be taken. Most cyclists in the area do use Beach Drive. They use everything. I mean, I see them everywhere. They're in Connecticut.
Yeah, I
They're,
used to live over in the, off of the,
and the trail to NIH through the park at Beach Drive is terrific. And it's
much better now.
a great resource. Absolutely. You people have done a great deal, but
That's Larry Cole's doing.
limiting, you know,
It is also
There's so much
subject to the
traffic here.
same process, is it not? So that if you.
Yes, all of these, that's why we're withholding any opinion here. All of these trails would go, or facilities would go through the same evaluation process to figure out what's most
Determine
feasible.
whether or not, in fact, it can happen. So using Dr. Orland's word and not Mr. Anderson's, this is aspirational. We believe that this would be the ideal solution, and you would advise us as to whether or not we could achieve it.
yeah, I don't think it's ideal.
Okay,
Count me no.
That's a no for Ms. Florina, yes for,
Well, wait, yes for which? For the, again, I don't think either one of us really, they're gonna fall on our swords in this one, but you should pick either what the planning board's recommending, what I'm
I'm
recommending.
going with you, Dr. Orland, on this.
Mr. Hooker?
Separate, he's saying separated bike lanes on Cedar Lane. That
Cedar.
removes their on-street parking.
On one,
It's in
On
top,
one side.
yeah, it's unacceptable.
Mr. Hooker?
I think I'm with you.
2-1, a quiet 2-1.
We're not gonna build it.
All right, the next one is Dale Drive. It's a little confusing, the plan. The plan doesn't have a line for Dale Drive bikeway, but there are reference to the desire for there to either be a either a side path, which is a hiker bike trail, or a sidewalk, if a side path is not deemed to be feasible based on the study. As you know, there's $300,000, I think it's $300,000, it was set aside in facility planning to look at the initial feasibility of some type of pedestrian bikeway, bicycle accommodations along Dale Drive. It's not really funded for a full facility planning study yet. But nevertheless, we had an individual who recommended Elaine Norman, asking for it be designated as a side path. I concur with that, but rather than being in Tier 1, which is what he's recommended, it should be in Tier 2. Again, the same status as all the other projects that are in facility planning. Tier 1 are the ones that are actually programmed for construction, so.
Without objection?
Okay. Wilson Lane, there's an individual, Ira Raskin, I don't know if he's a relation or not, who lives on Wilson Lane, who is not recommending there be a bikeway along Wilson Lane, particularly in the section between Bethesda and Bradley Boulevard. It'll be very difficult to implement, absolutely agree. It's a very tight right-of-way there, fences and trees, landscaping right up to the edge of the right-of-way, or up to the edge of the road almost. It's in Tier 5, however. It's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. And again, because this is a ceiling, not a floor, I'm concurring with the final draft that it'd be desirable to have a bikeway here, but
As one who drives that very often, I think it would be desirable. It's crazy that how tight it is there. So, and it's not going to be something that's going to be developed by private parties because there's nothing that's going to happen there. So it's going to be on our dime in Tier 5 at some point in time into the future. Okay?
silence is golden.
Without objection?
All right, okay. Century Boulevard in Germantown, This is the road that parallels 270 just to the west of it. And recently, the county extended Century Boulevard underneath Father Hurley Boulevard up to Kinsler Road. The master plan calls for two-way separated bike lanes. In other words, having separated bike lanes on both the east side and the west side through this area. There's currently an 8-foot wide shared use trail, a hiker biker path on the west side, and a 5-foot sidewalk on the east side. The two-way cycle track or separated bike lanes on the east side would be part of a longer breezeway that's being proposed from Germantown to, help me here, far distance away, whatever it is. We had a comment from Nicole Toto, who manages Symmetry at Cloverleaf, which is the development on the northeast side of Father Hurley Boulevard and Century Boulevard, who objects to this, saying that actually working with the planning staff and community planning, they're agreeable with leaving that section, maybe just for now, as a hiker-biker trail on the east side. She also thinks that the west side should stay with an 8-foot hiker-biker trail. I'm sort of in the middle on this one. I think having a two-way hiker-biker, two-way separated bike lanes on both sides is too much. Certainly on the east side, where it's part of the breezeway, that should happen, even though it's on the side that Ms. Toda's developing. And whether that's a requirement of their subdivision now or is something that the county's going to have to come back to later is to be determined by these folks. But I think the west side, the hiker-biker trail that exists now is sufficient. If anyone's going a longer distance, they can, who are working or living along Century Boulevard, they can just go down to the next block on that hiker-biker trail, cross the street at a protected crossing, and then jump on the breezeway.
Breezeway is the same as a greenway?
A breezeway is a higher quality bikeway that is intended to help people travel longer distances.
Breezeway is like a bike freeway.
I'm not going to say that, but it is intended to,
It breeze through.
There you go.
there's less delay, it's
Yeah, you
higher
gotta get-
quality construction, correct.
What does that mean?
In terms of hierarchy is what I meant. You're right, it doesn't have ramps and everything like that, but it's the highest function bikeway. It's something that it's designed to carry bikers a longer
Wider?
distance.
More?
no, in this
More
case-
volumes.
Separated?
So if we have a road network that is local roads and is our.
Yeah, I understand your conceptual idea, but what is it exactly physically?
It could be wider. It certainly would be separated from pedestrians.
It would be like, you'd have a grassy something between the bike lanes and the vehicular lanes, that sort of a
Certainly.
thing?
In this particular case, the proposal is for, how wide are the lanes in each direction? 8 feet, 7 feet?
Could be 8 to 10 feet.
In each direction?
In each direction?
Two-way
The two-
bikeway would be 8 to 10
8 feet, 8 to 10 feet total? Okay,
Plus
sorry.
side.
Total, for both of them?
Total. Yeah. The key here, it isn't unlike any other, separated bike lanes. The key is that it's linked with a lot of other separated bike lanes in a continuous way. So it becomes a very, it's a high-functioning bikeway.
What tier is this in?
Good question. Find it. This might take a minute to find, unless, Dave, most of you know off the top of your head.
I believe it's in 3, but I just want to confirm that.
While he's doing that, I just point out that, if this is just a factual question about what will fit in 136 versus 134 feet, I mean, I would suggest you just leave it as is and say, 136 feet, and if the property owner is correct that it all fits in a narrower cross-section, that's just it's not an ideological or philosophical question about how much stuff should be in the right-of-way, it's just what will actually fit once you design it.
It's a Tier 2 bikeway.
Thank you.
And there is development going on along that corridor, major center
So
activity.
what,
Germantown.
what you're saying is that you're okay with the current proposal on the table?
We're okay with the proposal. We recommend it. I think there's a slight change here, and that Dr. Orland is recommending retaining the shared use path that's on the west side of the road. We're simply saying, you can't look at the area as it is today, but there's supposed to be a high intensity, lots of development.
If something
in
is
the
going
area.
on right now, and staff has said they accept the offer to build this in a certain way, is that Mr. Orland or is that planning staff?
Let me reports this. There's an active subdivision being reviewed by Park and Planning through site plan, and that's the symmetry development. Apparently, the community planners, and this hasn't been, the planning board, I don't think you've acted on this yet, right? This doesn't come before you yet. Community planners there have been working with the developer and is okay with basically retaining just a hiker-biker trail on the east side. The plan, the draft plan recommends separated bike lanes on the east side as part of a breezeway, and I'm agreeing with that. It would be wider, but that isn't necessarily something that the developer would be required to build now. I mean, if it's not required to be built now, the county would likely come back at some future date. Tier 2, we didn't put dates on the tiers, but you can guesstimate about what we're talking about.
Well, this illustrates why you should have some confidence that when I say it's a ceiling, not a floor, this is what that looks like in practice. There can be a recommendation for this much, and the planning staff and board can accept something less than that, which is what's apparently being contemplated, although I haven't seen.
My simple question was, what it says in here, staff is willing to accept their offer to build a 10-foot wide shared use path.
Community
Is-
planning staff at Park.
That's you guys,
No, well,
That is planning staff.
not the planning board
Hasn't been to the
yet.
board yet.
Because you haven't decided, and we're not,
So the-
I'm not trying to do a subdivision, I'm just trying, I asked a simple question, was it you or was it Glenn?
no, not me.
So
It's not
planning-
Glenn, so it's you.
So, well, it's not me
Okay.
personally,
Not him
but it's
either.
planning staff,
Other
working with the developer, has agreed that the shared use path can be constructed as part of the development. At
Okay,
a later
so that's
time,
a
it can
yes,
be upgraded.
that's you guys.
That's the
Or
community.
the planning-
When I say you, I mean you collectively in terms of what institution of interest that you are representing.
Yes.
That's all I was asking.
And where I'm going.
Just to say, and it's been answered, best of all.
Well,
No, it
no, I'm
hasn't.
sorry. I think what you're really hearing
This is
here is that
what you
maybe a
make
different,
people crazy. all
believe it or
of you.
not, there are different points of view within the planning staff. It happens.
Then why did you write
Right.
this?
They're not universal, but it hasn't gone to the board yet. The board will make a decision.
So do I understand that, Dr. Rowland, your recommendation is to adopt the recommendation of the community planners?
No. For this master plan,
Yes.
I'm agreeing with the planning board, with the final draft, that on the east side of Century, we ultimately have separated bike lanes.
Okay.
The difference between the plan, with the final draft, what I'm recommending is on the west side, not where the development is, but on the other side, where there's an existing hiker-biker path, and I think that should be sufficient, rather than making that also a set of separated bike lanes. That's the difference.
So on the east side, where Dr. Orland disagrees with you, how strongly do you feel with respect to that?
I agree with him. East side.
We are in agreement on the east side. On the west side, we're in disagreement.
I thought on the west side that they was adopting.
The east side, there's agreement.
In other words, Mr. Ansbacher and Dr. Orland agree on the east side, but the community planners do not. So there's internal disagreement, and it hasn't been to the planning board yet. But I think that for your consideration is what to do about the west side, which is, should it be just a shared use path, or should there eventually be a two-way bike way? We've recommended a two-way bike way, but this falls, I think, in the category of the last item, which is we're not going to fall on our sword over it. We still stand by our recommendation, but defer to your judgment.
And the basis of your recommendation with respect to the shared use path, again, is that you think that should be sufficient with the,
Yeah, with the separated bike lanes,
On the other side.
high-level bikeway on the east side, a shared use path, which is not chopped liver, on the west side, which exists today, is fine. And if you're talking about somebody on the west side who wants to go a long distance, they can get on that hiker-biker path to the next intersection, cross the street at a crosswalk where there's a traffic signal, and get on the breezeway and breeze away.
Objection to Dr. Orland's recommendation?
I think Dr. Orland is brilliant.
Apparently you're brilliant.
Well, that's going in the minutes.
We are done with this.
St. Elmo Avenue in downtown Bethesda. Steve Robbins, representing a developer who wants to redevelop on St. Elmo Avenue, is concerned about the plan's recommendation to add add conventional bike lanes on St. Elmo. So right now you have a parking lane on each side and you have a travel lane, but the travel lane is actually pretty wide on St. Elmo. This is the one that runs by, well, I don't know, the parking garage 40 is there, there's lots of things along St. Elmo. It's only a 2-block street. My recommendation is to agree with the plan, the master plan as proposed by the planning board, that there be conventional bike lanes on that street. I think there's space for it. And it wouldn't take out the parking, and it would narrow the travel lane, certainly, but I think that that's all part of, again, traffic calming on that street. You don't want traffic going too fast on St. Elmo. Not that it's going too fast now, but so anyway, basically I'm agreeing with the plan.
Without objection?
Cherry Hill Road, this is a comment that was made by Dan Wilhelm of Greater Colville Citizens Association. He doesn't think it's necessary to add two-way separated bike lanes on the southwest side. This is the piece that runs between Route 29 and Prince George's County, sort of abutting Viva White Oak. The final draft has this bikeway in priority tier 1, which is the highest priority of all in the plan because of the impending development at Viva White Oak. And Mr. Wilhelm believes it's not necessary because there is a continuous side path, hiker bike trail on the other side of the road. I'm agreeing with the final draft. I think what's going to happen when Viva White Oak gets built out, there's going to be a lot more activity in terms of commuting and biking and walking as well. And being on the other side of Cherry Hill Road just doesn't get you there in terms of trying to get to and from locations through there. And the right-of-way should not be a big issue there. So I think it's fine to do what the planning board's recommending.
Without objection?
Can I ask?
Sorry.
It's proposed between 29 and the county line?
Yeah.
Has anybody talked to PG DOT about whether they have any interest in continuing this?
We have not reached out to them on this specific bikeway.
But it would have more efficacy if
That would be a
we're
good
willing to
idea.
invest it in
Probably
as well,
nothing.
right?
Probably nothing would be built south of FDA Boulevard until or unless that happened. But the plan could still reserve the right-of-way for it.
Sure.
Why don't
Okay.
you give him a jingle?
Just to be friendly.
Next.
Briggs Cheney Road, also in Mr. Wilhelm's testimony, he's recommending there doesn't really need to be additional work on Briggs Cheney Road as well. However, the master plan does call for the western segment of Briggs Cheney Road. This is from New Hampshire Avenue to Old Columbia Pike. There be a hiker-biker trail, a side path on the north side, and that there be a side path, I believe it's a side path, on the south side from Old Columbia Pike across the ICC and to Prince George's County. That also in the section between Old Columbia Pike and the ICC, there is proposed to be a side path on the north side. That part's a little bit more problematic because it means rebuilding the bridges over the ICC and US 29 to be able to accommodate that. But nevertheless, it's probably desirable because the north side's where the schools are and the other community facilities in that section. So a long way of saying that I'm agreeing with the planning board on this one.
Without objection?
There was a recommendation from James Everhart to have a short connection of a trail that is already master planned between Crabs Branch Way and Amity Drive to connect to what's called Brown Street in Washington Grove. The plan doesn't explicitly show a Brown Street connection, but it really is in the plan because what it really is a trail connector. It's a very short piece from this already master plan trail to the end of Brown Street. It's similar to like the Capitol Crescent Trail, which is going to have a lot of connection points to streets nearby. Those aren't explicitly listed in the plan either, but it's thought of as being part and parcel of the main trail. So I don't think there's any need to have additional language for that to happen. It's going to happen.
Okay, without objection?
And then finally, Jack Cochran's here. Jack's the chair of the Montgomery, I shouldn't say finally, because we have an addendum. The finally, in terms of the main packet, Jack Cochran from Montgomery Bicycle Advocates sent a very thoughtful, long letter with lots of comments about particularly individual bikeways. And basically what I've done is attach them on circles 48 through 60. And I've asked the planning staff to comment on each of his proposals. And actually, it's on circle 52 to circle 60, I apologize. And you'll see there, interspersed where it says response, that's the response from the planning staff. And we can go through each of these if you like, but basically what they're saying, Dave is basically saying, is he concurs with Jack on several of these and should go in the plan. On many others, more generically, no is not necessary. And I actually agree with Dave's points on all of these. So it's up to you as to you want to go through each one of them. And again, Jack is here if you want to do that.
I turn to my colleagues if we're comfortable with Dr. Orland's recommendation that the planning staff and Dr. Orland agree that there are some changes that ought to be made as a function of Mr. Cochran's recommendations. I'm okay with that if we want to hear each and every one.
No, if it's,
So, Ms. Cochran, you won some, you lost some. You want to come forward and give your pitch? Go ahead.
Jack Cochran, Chair of Mobike. Won some and lost some. I guess the ones where planning staff is willing to make changes were relatively minor, tweaks to this road and that road. The ones where they were not willing to concede was the very large major global issue for me, which is more important than all the others combined, which is that numerous roads in the county have existing shoulders or conventional bike lanes sometimes. And the plan does not recognize those shoulders, does not leave them in the plan, even where it's unlikely they would be removed. Unlikely they would be, I guess, intentionally removed for some time, but sometimes, when a road is widened or narrowed or reconfigured, turn lanes added, whatever, those shoulders have a tendency to be removed. But philosophically, there are many cyclists in the county who use those shoulders. The more experienced cyclists, whatever you want to call them, the confident and enthusiastic cyclists, that they use shoulders typically because they allow for fast, efficient travel that's more isolated from pedestrians. Doesn't have, obviously we support protected bike lanes. We're not asking for those to be removed from the plan, but simply for the shoulders in those areas to be retained, which may in some cases mean putting a shared use path in instead of protected bike lanes as the low-stress accommodation. But essentially we're asking for shoulders to remain that already exist and keep those in the plan.
well, why couldn't we include language? Do we have any language that acknowledges this? I mean, that's
What was
how
the-
actually cyclists ride.
So there's this issue, of course,
Actually-
came up a couple of times during the planning board work sessions, and we tried to add language to address Mr. Cochran's concerns. I think the fundamental issue that we were grappling with, though, is that we want to make sure we can get a comfortable bicycle facility that everyone, kids on up, can be comfortable riding in. And if we need space from the shoulder, we might have to take space from the shoulder to build that facility. If we don't need that space, if we can preserve it for existing bike lanes or existing shoulders, fine. But we want to make sure that the off-road path is prioritized. And so we have a language that speaks to that in the plan. And I can read
Where would
that.
that be?
There is, on page 37
Of the plan?
of the plan,
So if I understand this, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is the tension, as you say, between the experienced bicyclist and the desire to make it safer for less experienced cyclists and to make it more safer for the less experienced bicyclist. We're recommending a separated bike path that could come at the expense of the shoulder, therefore your constituency.
Theoretically, yes. There is tension, but I'm not sure it's an either or, and that's my.
In many instances, the bike lanes and the shoulders could remain exactly as they are, but.
So where there is the tension, what's the language that addresses the tension?
So it's on the top of page 39
Of the plan.
of the plan, and I can read that. It says, therefore, this plan provides the following guidance. Where space is available and does not substantially detract from the default bikeway, conflict with another master plan recommendation, or exceed the master plan right-of-way, bike lanes or bikeable shoulders can be added in addition to the default bikeway.
Okay, so it's in this, but it's the next paragraph.
Right. Moreover, before taking away existing shoulders or parking lanes, road designers and future planners should be cognizant that cyclists often ride in these spaces, again, the shoulders of the bike lanes, even if they are not specifically identified as bikeways in this plan.
Cochran, I think you did all right.
I guess we don't feel the language is strong enough in that it basically says, DOT, it's up to you, and leaves sort of shoulders to, benign neglect. And also the language in the plan throughout the textual part of the plan sort of minimizes the value of these things. The message is that shoulders don't
Well,
necessarily have value.
But, Jack, isn't it true, I mean, if you're a really serious cyclist, this doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter.
No, because you're going to bike wherever you're confident in biking. Whether or not it's a bike lane, a shoulder, or whatever. I mean,
Not that confident. I guess I'm in that.
I've seen a lot of cyclists recently who, they'll take, on a busy day, they'll take, if it's a group, they'll take a lane. That's okay. Individuals will, if they're confident speed cyclists, they'll, they're going out River Road, no problem, and, Route 28, all those places, well, those are state roads too, but all those places where there's really isn't room, shoulders-wise, but, we're learning as drivers, people are learning as drivers to, be cognizant of all that. So, you say, I guess we're unclear on what the thread is that you see here.
Well, I think there's two.
Well, I'm asking Jack, what is the threat that you see here? That shoulders will no longer be available for bicycling?
That they'll be, that when plans like Tuckerman Lane, for example, which is in facility planning right now, that would, because there's no, the planning department wants to take the shoulders out of the plan, that when DOT and everybody considers options for that project, that the shoulder option will be, downplayed.
But won't it be translated into a bike lane?
The shoulders would then become, I guess, either,
There would still be
protected bike lane.
room for bicyclists.
Protected bike lane, yeah.
And a
But that would
protected
all but
one-
ruin it for many of the cyclists who use that road.
Pardon me?
That would all but ruin the road for many of the cyclists who use it.
Because of the potential for
Less
mixed
experienced. Yeah.
mixed cyclists.
Because you can't move into the roadway when
You
there's,
can, though.
Three or-
Well, I see, because you're not supposed to.
because there's a barrier. Protected bike lane has a barrier between the bike lane.
Is that what you're proposing for Tuckerman, a barrier?
Oh, yeah, because right now there is a shoulder, but.
I see
people
Jack's
are
point, though.
Flying down, there's a hill, downhill if you're going towards Cabin John, and you go under the freeway underpass where nobody can really see you because it's dark.
It's a great shoulder there.
There is a great shoulder, but I submit that Tuckerman is not Jack's best case to point to, because I think there's enough dispersion of bicycle traffic. There is a lot of bike traffic on there, for sure. It's a major sort of thoroughfare, especially for recreational bicycles on the weekends. However, it's not like it's congested. So you'll be able to go quickly down that route, even if there's bollards there protecting you. It's not like you need all the
I see Jack's
space.
point. It's a major access point to the western part of the county.
Well, in regards to Tuckerman Lane, I think this actually might illustrates our point. This was just brought to the planning board as part of a facility planning study. You're going to review it in about a week. The staffs, DOT and planning are in agreement on this road that there should be both on-road bike lanes and a shared use path. So that is in the design that you're going to see.
That doesn't help Jack.
It does
But
help
you're going
that.
to do it anyway.
No, he doesn't want that.
He does want that. He's looking for the conventional bike lanes on this road. And we're in agreement on that.
Okay, well, if
Well,
that's what you're saying.
Well, that's good.
Well,
Not every
I-
road is so.
All the more reason for this adequate language to be proposed, to be in here, to make it very clear that this can be a negotiation process. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. You're saying there isn't. I can see from your body language.
It's fine.
I can see it. It's pretty clear. It's good body language, don't you think, people?
I think it's fine.
Well, I'm sure you do. That's the problem.
I was going to suggest that there's a little bit of a subset of the issue that Jack's talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. There will always be a subtext.
That's different than this, which is places where a road's designed and doesn't have a wide shoulder because nobody's thinking about bicyclists and it's not in the master plan. So I thought that one, at least that's the way I understood at least part of the implication of his comment, and I was going to suggest that it might be helpful to say it as best practice just on the principle of complete streets, that when you are building or rebuilding a road, that a wide shoulder is good for bicyclists, and just because it's not in the plan doesn't mean that shouldn't be.
Well, there's still language in this plan that says the issue of the use of shoulders has to be considered as this goes forward. But you're really.
Have to be considered.
You're arguing about a plan, about something that's gone in facility planning now, I think, is what you're saying. I think that's what I'm hearing, is that right?
That was an example,
But it's an
there's
example.
a dozen other roads here that I'm
Yeah,
looking
okay,
for language
well-
on those roads on a road-by-road basis.
I'm sorry,
I've asked
sympathetic.
the chairman to draft up some language that reflects his last comment with respect to its best practices when roads are being resurfaced or otherwise, to identify the shoulder and for bicyclists. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay? Give you your time, good sir. All right?
Yeah.
Okay, now we go to the appendix.
Before we get there, I have one
Addendum.
issue I wanted to raise, and I believe, Dr. Rowland, you're aware of it, and that is, this is a bicycle master plan. We have a BRT master plan. And it is possible that there are times when the two perhaps would be in conflict, like 355, for example. We may not be able to do it all. And so we may need to make choices as to what is more important. And so I have language that basically says that when there's a conflict between BRT master plan and the bike master plan, the BRT takes priority. Open to commentary with respect to it.
I understand where you're coming from. I would just say that the whole BRT network was modeled in terms of ridership based. It's not a park and ride system. Just like the Purple Line. It was the ridership modeling for those routes and stations was done on the assumption everybody's going to take it, is going to get there, not in their car. So that means that bike and pedestrian infrastructure is not something separate from the BRT system. It's the same problem we had with the Purple Line. Everybody viewed that as well. You know, the Purple Line project's taking up all this money and space, so can you compromise the sidewalks and the other stuff? The answer is that would be short-sighted because the ridership depends on being able to get to the station without parking your car there or even driving past it. So I would suggest to you,
All I was suggesting, though, Mr. Anderson, was where there's a limitation in the right-of-way that would preclude us from doing both. Okay? So that one has to make the choice.
I guess the key is, what do we mean by right-of-way? Because in master plan rights-of-way, which are in the plan, and including those few that we added about an hour ago, there is enough room for BRT and the bikeways. But if we're talking about existing right-of-way, then there isn't. In fact, there probably isn't even enough of the BRT in the existing. And so it gets down to what can they require for dedication, for example. So I think
My guess is that this issue is entirely related to existing right-of-way and not master plan right-of-way.
that's what I'm
It's a
guessing.
project development issue, not a master planning issue. We are dealing with this issue in some places where we have BRT corridors, and we can get the desired facilities within master plan rights-of-way, but the master plan rights-of-way don't exist. They're not imaginary, but they're next to imaginary when it comes to building an actual transportation project.
I would suggest that if you want to do this, you should include some language that says that connectivity for bikes and pedestrians should be incorporated, whether or not that is within the same curb to curb or in the existing right-of-way. If you can't fit it all in what's available in practical terms, whatever may theoretically be available, you should find some alternative access. And we talked about this last time, about the redundancy and the need to find alternative, parallel routes, that sort of thing. So what I just would hate to see is somebody says, oh, this language says BRT comes first, therefore don't include the sidewalk, don't include the bike path, and then there's no way to walk or ride your bike to the bus.
Why don't I suggest that if you haven't seen the language, let me share the language with the three of you and see if you can't come up with the words that you think make this concept work, okay?
That's fine.
Well,
And we'll circulate it to the committee, and if the committee is agreeable, it'll be a committee recommendation when it gets to the full council.
well, this applies to Route 29.
Yep.
Applies to 355, presumably.
Yes.
Applies to Veers Mill. I think that's the problem with having these plans. There are inevitably going to be conflict. And that's the overall concern with this thing, that this trumps everything else. And there's, it all has to be worked out.
Yeah.
And you can't do everything. We don't have the right-of-way, people.
Well, cool.
This ain't the Champs-Élysées everywhere, like people think. So I just think it has to be understood that this is aspirational, this stuff. And that, things are going to evolve over time. We're not going to do it, it's not going to get done in 5-year chunks necessarily, and it's not going to be always the solution because there are other competing priorities, and that will have to be sorted out. I think that's your point. And you're saying that one always wins. And I think it's unwise of us to say we know who always wins. Not that I don't fundamentally disagree that this is a conversation that needs to be had, but I don't know that we know the winner of these things. It might be the pedestrian should win. I don't know. It depends.
Well, corollary is, not a corollary, a good example, and actually, Mr. Brewer, I think you only proposed this, when you're looking at the purple line. Talk about constrained right-of-way, this is what the right-of-way is,
That's
period.
made it all happen.
And so you led the committee and the council agreed that we should have a 12-foot Capitol Crescent Trail with actually shoulders on either side and all of that. But in places where the right-of-way is particularly constrained, you could go narrower. And that's what the state's building.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same kind of thing here, I think.
So again, I'll leave it that the three of you your organizations will look at this language, see if you feel there's general merit to it, fine tune it, send it back to us. We'll circulate it among the committee. If the committee's comfortable, it'll be a committee recommendation. If not, I'll offer it at full council.
Okay, I need about 15 more minutes, and then we'll be done.
15 more minutes?
Maybe
Really?
10. All right, it's the addendum, we haven't done that yet. I'm saying 15, thinking maybe it'll end up being 5.
All right, that's good.
I'm okay with the amendments.
Okay, Grosvenor Lane, again, we just came in a couple days ago. Ms. Boker objects to Grosvenor Lane being a side path, particularly in the western section of it between, are you saying you're okay with all this?
Yes, I'm okay with your recommendation.
Good to know.
You're brilliant, is that what?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is going in the minutes. The western section of it from the Bethesda Trolley Trail over to Old Georgetown Road, she's saying it's too narrow there, to a lot of impacts. This is a very, that section of it is Tier 5, which again, it may or may not ever be built, but I think it's important to actually do what the planning board's recommending in the plan, which is to show a side path on one side. Don't know whether it's the north or south side. For no other reason that the Wayside Elementary School is on that side, is along that section of road, and it would be good to have a hiker-biker trail that kids could take to bike to school.
We're good?
Greater Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce, basically, they reiterated some issues that were raised by other testimony. I don't think there's any need to look at that again, but I was asked to put this in the packet. United Therapeutics sent a letter on August 23rd, and they have a lot of good suggestions. They really were suggestions for DOT in terms of how to implement these bike trails. It's not so much a master plan issue. And then finally, Tuckerman Lane near Grosvenor Metro Station, Five Squares, which is building the development there, notes that in the master plan you adopted just last year, it calls for a separated hiker-biker lanes on the west side.
Without objection?
And the planning board says different. I'm agreeing with them.
Less than 5.
It was, all right.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your good work with respect to this.
Just an announcement. I think we're going to try and have this scheduled for full council work session, not final approval, on October 16th. So if we can get this language all worked out in the next few days, that'd be great.